Welcome to the German Marshall Fund of the United States. My name is Heather Conley, president of GMF. For the past 47 days, we have rightly focused on Russia's war against Ukraine, the need for humanitarian assistance, for military assistance, and to strengthen NATO. But President Zelensky has also warned us about another global crisis that is about to hit us. That would be food insecurity, a lack of wheat, barley, fertilizer, rapeseed, sunflower oil. Recently, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the ranking member wrote a letter to President Biden asking for a food strategy to aid Ukraine, but also to address this global food insecurity crisis. An important fact, over 50 countries depend on 30% from Russia and Ukraine of their wheat supply. This is going to be a long-standing crisis. So in order to have a greater understanding of the implications of the global food crisis and what the US and its allies can do to help us mitigate it, I cannot imagine two better people equipped to help us understand this important challenge. First, I am absolutely delighted to hand the floor over to GMF trustee and former senator from North Dakota, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who has dedicated her life to rural and agricultural issues and helping to elevate those voices in our political discourse. And of course, we are absolutely thrilled to have our special guest, Ambassador Cindy McCain, with us, permanent U.S. representative to the U.S. agencies in Rome, the perfect person at this crisis moment. So with that, thank you. Thank you for joining us for this very important topic. And Senator Heitkamp, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thanks to the German Marshall Fund for elevating, I think, this dialogue. One of the challenges that we've had is we've spent a lot of time in the last, several months since the Ukrainian war broke out, talking about energy security and the lack of energy security and rising energy costs and what that means. And maybe in the background, and maybe too much in the background, has been this issue about food security and what this could mean for long-time food supply chains. And so I am thrilled today to have convinced our great friend, America's great patriot, Cindy McCain, to join me. Ambassador Cindy McCain was sworn in by the Biden administration to serve as the permanent resident of the United States mission to UN agencies in Rome on November 5th, 2021, one of our first ambassadors approved by Congress. What you need to know about Cindy is that every challenge she takes on, things get done, and people get spoken to, and the world becomes a better place, whether it is the work that she's done on human trafficking, where she has really led the world in raising awareness, but also providing meaningful solutions, demining in many, many countries where she has worked very, very diligently to make those countries secure for future generations. And now taking on this global challenge, she has been an incredible spokesperson. Probably the thing I want you to know most about Cindy is that where she will always approach things from a fact-based standpoint. What unique policies she brings is an understanding of what families need in the world and in our country, what children need in the world and our country, and how she can use her enormous talents to make the world a better place. She now has been heavily engaged in this food insecurity issue. And so I'm going to open it up and let Cindy make a few opening comments. And for those of you who think I'm being disrespectful, yes, I'm going to call her Cindy and not Ambassador, because I know I'll slip up anyway. But I think some opening comments, and then we're going to kind of set the stage for what all this means right now in this point in time, what we might be able to do about it in the future as we look at food security writ large, and then just an overall discussion of what's happening in Europe with the transatlantic relationship. And so, Cindy, if you'd like to make a few comments, that would be great, and then we'll get into our discussion.
Thank you, Heidi. I really appreciate being on this with you, especially because These issues are issues that not only do you really understand, but you bring such a perspective to them. So I'm very, very honored, very humbled to be on this with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. I do have some opening remarks, only because I want to set the stage for what we've been doing here in Rome and kind of where we're headed with this whole issue. When Secretary of State George Marshall set out to help rebuild Europe after World War II, we understood that you can't achieve lasting peace and stability if people are desperate and they're starving. Food security is the central issue. It's the central issue. It's the link between every other global challenge we face. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is the latest example. Putin's unprovoked and unjustified war on Ukraine has triggered a far-reaching humanitarian crisis. This war of choice compounded an already tenuous situation. Russia's actions are affecting the entire global food supply chain as the world still reels from an ongoing pandemic and devastating climate change. We're looking at skyrocketing food and fertilizer prices around the world and critical grain shortages that are hitting countries already on the brink. Russia is bombing one of the major breadbaskets of the world. There are reports of agricultural fields, roads, and ports being mined by the Russians. This war will further exacerbate global food insecurity by interfering with the upcoming planting season and the transport of food within the country. 40% of wheat and corn exports from the Ukraine go to the Middle East and Africa, which are already grappling with hunger. Ukraine itself has long been a major source of wheat for the World Food Program. WFP is feeding 138 million people in more than 80 countries, including Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Nigeria. The Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, estimates that as many as 13 million people worldwide may not get enough to eat as a result of this invasion. Putin's war is forcing us to take from the hungry to feed the starving. Rising prices force hard decisions to cut rations in some of the most desperate humanitarian crises in the world, including Afghanistan and Yemen. How the global community responds will have lasting and far-reaching effects on generations to come. Heidi, we're faced with, as you know, a situation that is untenable. In the four corners of the globe, there are people that simply will go to bed without any food tonight and for probably a week or so. So we're faced with now at my organization is figuring out how we can feed more with less and how we can progress through this and how we can also make sure that we can supply the most nutritious elements, the supplements and things that we do feed our children that are really desperate down the road. So with that, I'll open it up and I'll answer questions and do whatever you want to do.
Well, I think when we look at the overall situation, we've had generation after generation where we've had this discussion about what do we do to make sure people can and countries can in fact feed themselves. We haven't been as successful given the level of investment, and we could talk a little bit about what we need to do in response to this, because we can't live crisis to crisis.
No.
But I want to talk a little bit about, Cindy, about the global G7 ag, what you would call ag ministers, we call them Secretary of Agriculture here. Tom Vilsack in early March, basically took part in a G7 agricultural ministers meeting, which was convened in response to Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainian minister addressed the group. The ministers expressed their shared commitment to safeguarding global food security and nutrition, strengthen supply chains, avoid export bans and other trade restriction to maintain open and transparent markets. And the one thing that I want to pick out of this and talk to you about is I think the immediate reaction way too often to this kind of crisis, rising prices, is we in the United States produce for our country. In fact, we overproduce for our country. We help feed the world. The immediate reaction might be, we are going to retreat. We are going to lock in our supply to keep our price low and not export or grow to this international market. And that would have, I think, devastating consequences for the work that you do. How concerned are you about export bans and what that might mean for the supply of source material that you need for the work you do?
Well, Heidi, you hit upon probably one of the key questions right now. You're exactly right. It would be devastating. I spend probably half or more of my day talking to various countries and their emissaries in the Rome UN system about just this, about not closing borders, about not restricting, so that we can not only, the prices they've already risen, as you know. But so that we can continue to feed those who are less fortunate and those who are really desperate. It's twofold, as you know. It's not just about feeding Ukrainians. It's about feeding so many other people. I mean, every country I go to, there's a purpose in it, and that's to see what we're doing and how feeding is happening there. If we were to close borders, people will literally starve. We can't do that. And so I know our country is encouraging just that, and other countries that I talk to every day are working to do the same thing and not close borders and encourage other countries to do the same. But let's be clear, it's not set in stone yet. There are some real hurdles to get over with regard to this very issue, and it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, and when you look at what can American producers be doing right now, what can European producers do right now, and I know that there is a fair amount of land, especially in states like mine, that have been idled in CRP programs, and there's a lot of us on this side of the Atlantic who have been saying, look, we can maintain soil integrity of those lands, but also produce. And so we're pushing very hard, Cindy, to look at opening up CRP without going to for tilling kinds of methodologies, but keeping that soil intact because it's marginal soil, but producing for this environment. I spend a lot of time worrying, I think, about what fertilizer shortages might mean for those countries that have built their ag industry, but have not, are dependent on Russian fertilizer. What do you see in terms of supply chain for fertilizer in those countries that might have a chance to feed themselves, but will come up short because they won't be able to grow as much as what they've grown before?
Well, quite frankly, I think the horizon is bleak right now with regards to fertilizer, and I wish I had better news. But it simply isn't going to progress out of there. We're not going to be able to move it out of there because there simply aren't ways. The Russians ship a lot of that via the ocean, via the oceans, and right now the whole area where it comes out of is blocked. And so you've got warships in the area. You've got everybody's up. As you can imagine, it's a war zone. But let me also say with this. We mentioned something earlier on, and you did particularly, even if we could move it. So let's say they open up the humanitarian pipelines where we can move fertilizer, we can move grains, we can move, in a way where it's safe to do so. The fields in Ukraine are mined. The equipment to harvest the planting is mined. And we're coming up on the harvest season, as you know. So even if we could do it, we're not going to be able to get it out of there because the Russians have done such terrifically damaging things to this part of the world. So until those fields can be safely mined or demined, and can also be safely replanted, there's not much that's going to come out of there. We're all going to have to readjust, and most importantly, we're going to have to help our countries that are so desperate in as many ways as possible, and it's going to be very difficult. I've had mothers begging me for food now recently, and it's a hard. I don't want to be in that position. I want to be able to tell them, yes, I have food coming, but that's not the case.
Well, Cindy, did you ever think that this important work that you're doing on food security would double back on your important work on demining? It must break your heart personally to see that this is the consequence of war. And, you know, we know from places like Venezuela, from all over the world where you have done your work, that these are generational consequences when we look at mining a wheat field.
Right.
It's tragic.
Right. Even if they were to demine it, we never get them all. And I even though the organization I worked with always, prided themselves on the best ever, and they were, there's always a risk that you're not going to get it all. And so those who do go back into the fields eventually and do try to use the machinery that was left behind are at risk. They're at great risk. Yeah, still. So
let's go, as you said, you do not want to be the person on the front line who is telling a mother that you have no food for her to feed her children, or for, hungry villages. So let's play wish list, right? Let's play if I could run the world and make things possible tomorrow. What would you hope would be European policies? What would you hope would be American policies to deal with what we believe is going to be an ongoing and I mean, I think tragically serious global food crisis?
Well, you touched upon something very, very near and dear, obviously, is what, a wish list. What can we do? Well, there's plenty of things I would wish for. I would wish for more seeds. I wish for more ability to be able to plant the crops, to harvest the crops, more ability to transport it out of there. There is only one way that we can gain our wish list on any of this, and that is for Vladimir Putin to stop the bombing, withdraw the troops, and give the Ukraine back to the Ukrainian people. That's the only way out of this. And until we can make that happen, or he decides it would be the wisest thing to do, we're in a real mess here. And the Ukrainian people, as you know, 4.5, probably closer to 5 million now have exited Ukraine. And I mean, as you said, this is generational. This is going to go on for years and years and years, and into generations to come before this country can be put back together.
Yeah, and so let's turn our attention to the United States. As you know, I have pretty strong relationships with American producers. Yeah. I've been spending a lot of time talking to farmers about both their concerns about increased costs, whether it's being driven by diesel costs or fertilizer costs, supply chain disruption in terms of equipment. But now they're looking at, really a pretty lucrative global market, but yet these high input costs and this transition to try and grow what needs to be replaced, whether it's sunflower oil, whether it's barley, whether it's wheat. I'll tell you the good news. I talked to a couple farmers over the weekend, and they're seeing more wheat being planted in North Dakota. We were a state that was heavily converted to corn and soybeans, and I know you love soybeans because they're critical to the product that is essential to that conflict food delivery system. But they're also looking at sunflower oil. They're also looking at stepping up. And I think that when you have kind of this immediate reaction in this country, you have some glimmer of hope, but yet in spite of the G7 ag ministers getting together, I haven't seen a lot of follow-up in terms of strategies, whether it's opening up CRP, whether it is providing, now we're seeing some additional support for farmers on fertilizer prices in the United States, but we know that the United States overproduces for our population. And this will break your heart when you look at the latest numbers in terms of food security in this country. We have all, on the low end, we have terrible food insecurity and nutritional imbalance in income categories that we shouldn't. But at the same token, 30 to 40% of all the food which is purchased by American consumers ends up in our landfills.
Yes. Yeah. Food waste is one of the very issues that we work on here in Rome. And it's a big part of FAO and some of the other organizations is dealing with food waste and food, not just food insecurity, but food loss as well. And so, and it's huge in the United States. You know that. I mean, I like all of us, I try not to waste anything, but we all do. And now it's become critical. And so it's up to all of us to not only not waste, but to encourage our larger organizations not to waste, our restaurateurs, we can start at a local community level and help solve this problem in a small way.
Yeah, if you had a mother like I did, and I think you did, Cindy, and there was something left on your plate when you were our age, you were reminded that there were starving people in Africa.
Yes.
And maybe it's time for us to redevelop that ethic of our mothers, which is when you waste food, you really are taking, people said, we always wondered when we were kids, well, how would they eat this food anyway? If they want these green beans, they're welcome to them, right? But it does show the enormous disparity between wealthy nations like the United States and places like Afghanistan and Yemen and sub-Saharan Africa, where that food, if we could just figure out how to redivert or restructure our food delivery system, it could make such a huge difference.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. It could make a huge difference. Again, though, we're facing high fuel costs, high transportation costs, much higher than they've been in years past. And so it's going to, once again, I'll bring it back to the same thing, until Vladimir Putin decides this is a bad idea and he needs to get out, I don't think we're going to see much of this anytime soon. But I'm thrilled to hear, and I'd heard this before, but I'm thrilled that you're saying it publicly, that folks in North Dakota and other places are planting crops that are necessary right now. It makes me feel good as an American when I hear things like that.
Well, and it's being done without, obviously, wheat prices are high and you can make money planting wheat, but by the same token, a lot of them aren't equipped for it, but yet they see an economic opportunity, but they also see a moral imperative to try and fight back against Putin's war in any way we can. And so I think rising to the occasion to encourage food suppliers, and this is another one of my great wishes, is that we have smaller households. It used to be that my family of 9 could go through 2 loaves of bread easily in a couple days. This is not true for families today, but yet when you go to a big box store, you're buying 2, loaves of bread. And all of a sudden, if you don't have a freezer, what do you do with all this food? And so the kind of critical component here is to deal with today's crisis. And so I want to talk a little bit about where you see the shortfalls for the World Food Program, both in terms of supplies that you supply to feed a hungry world, but also distribution and what could be helpful for the international community to begin to address to make sure that you have what you need, Cindy, to do the important work that you're doing.
Well, in the immediate, in the emergency side of this, because there's 2 sides to the food issue. It's the emergency aspect, and of course, it's the sustainable aspect. And in the emergency aspect, which is WFP and a portion of FAO that deal in emergency situations, there's a huge shortage because once again, so much of the supplies came from Ukraine. So what we're seeing is, and we've cut rations, certainly in Yemen, we've cut rations in Madagascar, we've cut rations in the Sahel, we've cut rations pretty much all over the world by about half.
Cindy, can you just explain the consequences of cutting rations?
Yes. So for instance, a village, let's go into a village in Madagascar, which has already been devastated by climate change and devastated by a war in Ukraine, by a lack of food, et cetera, and no water on top of it. There's absolutely no water. So we go in and say, okay, we're World Food Program. Here you go. This is half of what we gave you last month, or half of what we gave you last week. Still the same amount of people, if not more, because infants have been born, and yet we can't feed them. So the claim that we make about taking food from the hungry to give to the starving is real. So these people who were just hungry before will now become starving. And so the starving, the transition into starving or famine, or however you want to put it, in regions of the world is very real, and we're already there, particularly in places like Yemen and Ethiopia and others, where we've had to say, we can give you one half of the food we gave you last month, and next month we're only going to be able to give you a quarter of it. And that's actually happening right now. And so we're not only busy raising money at World Food Program, but also trying to devise how we can get more commodities to be able to for the food that we do donate and give away to countries. The other side of that is the sustainability action, and that comes down to seeds, and it comes down to working with climate change, the long-term portion of this. So in the countries that right now are on emergency rations, where we're trying to help them be able to now grow crops on their own, or grow, the ability to be able to sustain themselves, all of a sudden we don't have the seeds because we can't get the seeds out of where it's coming from. I mean, it has this ripple effect that has absolutely transcended the globe right now. And so for WFP and all the other emergency organizations around the globe, you're not seeing as much food being distributed, and you're not seeing as much food that is going to be distributed in the long term. And it's very scary, in my opinion, and it breaks my heart.
So how, when you look at the shortage of emergency supplies, let's deal with that first before we talk about sustainability. You look at the shortage. How long will this last? And you can't keep cutting rations by half. So when do you see this, the ability to turn this around and actually meet the needs that, at least to the level that you were meeting before the war began?
Well, not anytime soon. I mean, I've seen, I don't know how many hundreds of WFP warehouses around the world through the years. They always have been stuffed to the brim, and with overflowing, being able to feed the people that are within their purview there. I was in 3 or 4 empty warehouses lately. I've never seen an empty WFP warehouse before, or it had one day's rations in it, that kind of thing. We are really seriously on the brink here. And so I know that our fearless leader, David Beasley, goes around the globe, not just raising money, but really bringing awareness to this issue in a major way. But we need more help. And it's what we're going to have to learn to do right now in the immediate future is learn to work with and produce grains and do things that we need to do to feed those less fortunate, and do it without Ukraine. And that's a huge deal. And do it without the fertilizer from Russia. Yeah, and you got me as to how we're going to figure that one out. So, well,
hopefully we will help in this country. Obviously, we're going into.
We always do.
A lot of the planting decisions were made in the fall. Seed was bought in the fall. Right. Fortunately for a lot of farmers, fertilizer was bought in the fall. Yeah. But we see this as a longer term kind of challenge for American agriculture. And I know that Secretary Vilsack has been a leader within the ag ministers, and I expect that we're going to see some increased attention to this issue, be it in the Foreign Relations Committee or the USDA, or with our ag committee that I sat on for a number of years. We always hope we can rise to the occasion, but we have a serious short-term problem. Want to raise something before we go to the sustainability, which I really want to get to too, Cindy. Want to raise the fact that right now in Shanghai, people are shouting out the windows that they're hungry, and this is China, right? And so as we kind of look at food insecurity driving, political and military insecurity, how concerned are you in the places that you work that already fragile governments, fragile societies will see a all-out political / military conflict as a result of this food shortage?
Well, I think it's a very real prospect. You do have people in Shanghai that are hungry. I've seen those clips of that. And you do have people in Central America hungry, and there's agitation as a result of it. The lack of food or food insecurity leads to disruption. It leads to anger. It leads to all the things that we have seen as a result of being frustrated, angry, and hungry. And nothing good comes of this. Nothing good comes of it. So it is up to all of us who can be helpful in some way or another. The United States is always first in line to do this, and we're always the best and the brightest at all of this, but we can't do it all. And so we must rely on our European partners and our Asian partners and our South American partners to be a part of this and be able to help feed in whatever way that they can other parts of the world that you wouldn't think of as being hungry. And China is one of them. You talk about Shanghai, that's a prosperous town. And yet just as you said, people are hungry and there's a food shortage. So,
and we're coming off major food supply chain challenges even before this because of the pandemic. And so kind of traditional supply chains were disrupted. Food insecurity, you take a look at what even happened in this country with meat products and the prices going up because we weren't able to produce to the market. And so if it happens in this country where we have one of the most sophisticated supply chains for delivery of food and food is affordable. The other thing I want to remind people is, especially if they're Americans, about 10% to 15% of our overall income as Americans goes for food. In places where Cindy works is 40, 45, 50, 60. And so it's not even, when the prices go up, even if the food is available, it's unaffordable for so many. So even if they could buy it, they can't afford it.
Right. And, and once again, we bring up if they could buy it, they can't afford it. Exactly. But you bring up another portion of this is the ability to move food around to get it out. And so I like to remind people that unless we have humanitarian corridors to get the food out, what little there is left in Ukraine, and there's some, but if we can't transport it safely, and if the Russians decide they're just going to bomb the convoy, then we're up against a hard place right now. So it's a number of issues, and you hit on all of them really well in terms of what we are facing. And this is going to be a year to be reckoned with regards to food security and food instability around the planet.
Well, and weather hasn't been our friend. Drought in Brazil, floods in some of the other Eastern agricultural, Vietnam has had its challenges. And so our traditional, we built a global agricultural distribution system, and we were incredibly proud of that. It was important for American producers, but now we're seeing vulnerabilities. And so I want to point something out that I think we're going to see in the next, speculation, obviously, but in the next couple months, people used to ask me when I did trade work, trying to open up markets for American and particularly North Dakota products, why the Europeans were so closed door as it related to agriculture. They were, open on tech, they were open on trade relations, but they were very protective of their farmers. And I said, well, it's probably a tribute to the political clout of farmers globally, but and you see that right now in India. But I said, probably more important, they know what it was like to be hungry.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so appropriate, given that this is a German Marshall Fund presentation, for you to raise the Marshall Plan, which the Germans basically helped us create the German Marshall Fund as a thank you for that enlightened policy. Unfortunately, we've developed somewhat of a mentality of America first. You know, I was instrumental in opening up oil exports out of this country for shale oil. I've been criticized for that because they think it drives prices up. Global oil prices are established globally, so we could have an argument about that. But the initial impulse is always close the door. Close the door. Or, you know, take America first, take care of our own. We don't want to spend any more money. I want you to make the case to the American people that investing in your organization and the organizations that you work with, especially the World Food Program, is absolutely essential to save America's opportunity globally and into the future.
Well, I've heard this complaint and this argument from many people. And the EU has been so far has hung tough, but I also understand that things are tenable right now. We have, number one, we have to avoid export bans, and we have to, you know, that would restrict trade with food and agriculture, et cetera. And all these things are only going to exacerbate the prices. But more importantly, we as Americans, once again, lead the way on making sure that people understand where we're at in the world. And we're going to have to work with other countries, demand of other countries to take a step forward, because America cannot burden this alone. So what I do, and what we do at World Food Program especially, is to encourage public-private partnerships in this. And this is how, if you decide to give to WFP, or if you decide whatever you decide to do and give to, or whatever, is make sure that there is a public-private partnership in it, and whatever partnerships there are, everyone's working together and working as one unit in trying to fix these issues. But it's very complex, and it's very, I know my own family, and I'll gauge it off them, is I'll explain these things to them and they'll go, yeah, but Mom, we just want to help. What do we do? And so you understand what I'm saying. So when you take it to the American people, it's very complicated. And so, and then a lot of people think, well, oh, it's just, why should we do that? You know, it's a war that's 1 billion miles away. Why should we care? You know, I've got my own problems. Well, we should care, because this affects all of us. It's going to affect all of us if it hasn't affected you right now. And so that's the argument I use.
Yeah, and honestly, global conflict always has a consequence economically on the United States of America. And if we can avoid global conflict, and never mind the morality of it, economically, it is in our economic best interest. Cindy, I want to just take a few minutes and have you describe the World Food Program and their distribution of emergency, high value food sources. And just so people know, if they are thinking about, you know, what can we do to help the World Food Program? Incidentally, a Nobel Peace Prize winner. What can we do to help the World Food Program? They understand, number one, that Peace Prize came as a result of not just providing food, but being the best in time delivery system, which is so hard. So just describe the kind of food that the World Food Program delivers.
Well, there's several different aspects to World Food Program, and of course, community feeding, feeding that goes into schools, that goes into small community projects, et cetera. I'll start with, let's take our most vulnerable, and those are our infants and children. And as you know, women, infants, and children are the first affected by any problem that scales up in any of these countries. They're the most vulnerable, and they're always the first to get hit. And so in many parts of the world, World Food Program provides a high nutritional, high protein packet that's a paste that they give to infants. And one packet a day can actually not only save a child's life, but build the kind of complex proteins within their system that build brains, that build, good strong bones, et cetera. These are nutrients that we take for granted here in the United States because, of course, our children get them. These kids can't survive on just wheat and grain. They need the complex proteins that go into these things. So that's one of them. They give school programs, for instance. In some countries, the only way to get girls to go to school is if we give food to the family. I happen to think, and I think the majority of Americans think the same thing, that girls' education is very important. So I love to see school feeding programs that deal specifically with girls and be able to feed them and feed their family as a result of them, or as a result of it. There's also our community feeding programs, and that's where you get together 10 or 15 people within the community, and more bulk items are given: beans, rice, flour, depending on the region, sunflower oil, oils of some kind. And those are given, in bulk, and like every 15 days, depending on the community as to where it is, every 15, 20 days or so. It's tailored to the region, and it's tailored to the local communities as well. And it's been very highly successful. It's a program that I don't think many people understand how in-depth it is and how deep into societies it goes, and the results it has. As when we talk about saving lives, I mean, this is the exact example that should be given every time, is what the World Food Program does. Yeah. And how can they help? Obviously money. I mean, none of this takes place without a lot of money, and the U.S. government cannot fund it all. And we do have plenty of partners around the world that help fund World Food Program, but we are the largest. And also private partnerships that can help on this as well. So there's a lot going on. It's exciting to be in Rome. It's the prospect of being able to expand World Food Program on not only being able to hopefully feed more, but also being able to continue the job that they're doing already.
Yeah. So Cindy, I'm old enough to remember the grain embargo of the 1980s. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why Jimmy Carter got such a black eye in states like North Dakota. We were a major wheat producer. We exported a lot of wheat to Russia. Yeah. Now look at just 40 years later, kind of the turnaround. Russia is a major exporter of wheat. So we know that sustainability, given, the mother of necessity, what do they say? The mother of invention is necessity. So now we're once again in an exacerbated crisis. We've been in a food security crisis for a lot of years, but now for a lot of countries, now we're in what will impact not just the countries that you deal with, but countries across Europe. Even in the United States, where food prices go up, it's going to impact our lower income families.
It will.
And so once again, we're in crisis. But let's talk about sustainability. And I want to give a shout out, to our friend Howard Buffett.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Howard for years has been preaching, quit looking at the green revolution, look at the brown revolution, look at soils, look at sustainability, look at water conservation. And he has invested, literally billions of dollars in Latin America and in Africa to try and grow capacity for sustainability.
Right.
What we're seeing now is reports coming out of the various organizations saying the so-called green revolution has not achieved the result of food security for Africa, driven in part, I think, by climate and by the lack of water, but also by some bad choices in terms of how you make this, how you make the case. And so Howard has, proud to say, built what I think is the first land grant college. It's independent. His organization built it in Rwanda, and they're training extension agents. For those of us who are from ag country, you know how important they are. People who can go out and teach the farmers how to use practices that are more tailored. But yet, you know, there is a frustration level, I think, by folks saying, we've been at this a lot of years.
Yeah.
Why don't we have better results on sustainability? And what changes do we need to make in terms of our investments to guarantee that a crisis in, you know, a war, this horrible war that Putin has initiated, if that happens in another place where we rely on their products, we are not dependent in terms of dealing with the devil to basically avoid global starvation.
Right. Well, congratulations to Howard. I mean, it's what he's done is an amazing project, and it's having great success, I know. But we need more Howard Buffetts. We need more private citizens and private corporations to come in and do just that. He's one part of the globe, a fabulous part of it, by the way, but we need more of that. It's difficult to be able to rally the troops when we don't know about it either. So it's up to people like you and me and others to really shout at the rooftops the kinds of good things that are being done and where we need more. But sustainability is the key to all this in many ways, because we can do all we can do to feed people. We can do all we can do to hopefully put crops back in the ground, etc. But unless things are sustainable, unless the soils are tended to, as you mentioned, unless water becomes a real part of this discussion, none of this is sustainable. And so it's the kind of thing where every part has to work together, and many people have to work together. We can no longer work in silos, which the UN is famous for silos, as is the government. And I like to scream about that a little bit, because we can't work like this anymore. We have to work together. We have to work, and we also have to think outside the box. What we used to think was the way to do things may not be the way now. It can't be the way now. It doesn't always work, and in some ways it's never worked. So this is a combination of entities and education and people and here we are at a global crossroads, quite frankly. If we can do this and make it work in even a small way, then we can be sustainable with these things.
I think the important message is, don't hunker down. Don't you be kind of put up your dukes and say, I'm going to protect what I have and mine. I mean, that's what shortage creates. It creates and I think when you look at it, that is such a short-sighted kind of reaction to this. And let's make grain from Russia irrelevant.
Right. Exactly. No, you're exactly right. Make it irrelevant.
Right? And make fertilizer from Russia and oil and gas from Russia. Make him irrelevant. In the global supply chains and marketplaces. Cindy, before we have to sign off, I had the great good fortune to know your husband and serve with your husband. And I maybe for good or bad, I never traveled with him. I heard about the death marches that John put everyone through, but I don't think there was anyone who was more committed to the transatlantic relationship and more aware of the danger that retreating from our allies, that danger would have on the global stage. I know that you must be thinking about John every day, at least 5-6 times a day, saying, man, I can hear him in my ears. What would John be saying right now? And what do you think he would be doing in terms of recommendations to improve, number one, our transatlantic relationship, but also our ability to fight back against autocrats, no matter where they exist, and fight for democracy?
Well, we all know that that John was right on this one. He called Putin for what he was and said that he called him from the very beginning, that their country was a gas station masquerading as a country. He unfortunately he was right. And so what we're faced with now is, of course, the devastation of a democratic country that was a fledgling democracy, but a democracy, and one that had a very bright future. And for that reason, he would have been somewhat devastated over that, because he was very fond of not just Ukraine, but the experience and the experiment of democracy that was taking place there. He would be scolding some of these countries as well for either not stepping up to the plate or somehow criticizing what's already around, and saying, this is what we do. We are part of this transatlantic agreement. This is what we do as countries. We need to work together. And we're seeing some of that, of course. I mean, there's been a lot of that, but I think he would be begging for more, and not begging for more. He'd be demanding more.
Yeah.
On this. John didn't beg for anything. I'm going to get struck by lightning tonight for that one. But as you know, he was the one that we looked to for guidance. He was a moral compass in this region, and unfortunately, he was right. And so I'm just sorry he's not here for so many reasons, but this is one of them. I wish he were here to remind people of what's right, and how much we should value and demand democracy in the world.
And to look at the emerging threats.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that when we kind of look at this relationship between China and Russia, and how do we have a response, a global response to that relationship, and how does this intersect with our economic interests, or our own food security interests, our own energy security interests? North Dakota obviously does both of those things.
Yeah, but our own, if I may interrupt, our own cyber interests as well, because so to me, the natural impulse is to do what you're saying. It's miles away. Why should I care? Yeah, why should I care?
Yes, it was in the paper immediately, and I was concerned. But when you look at polling and they say, what's the most critical issue for you? Ukraine, in terms of your voting, it's very low on the list. I think it's time for us to recalibrate and to understand that we built a global world order through things like the Marshall Fund. Right. Through patriots like John McCain, who continued to remind people of the significance and importance of those relationships. We built those things for a reason, not because we're altruistic, but they benefited the United States of America. And the last thing we can do right now is retreat from sharing energy, whether it is improving our delivery of natural gas to Europe, now our delivery of natural gas to other parts, looking at development and innovation in other parts of the world to provide energy security. But food security will be something that our audience is going to hear a lot more about in the coming months. And Cindy, I am just so grateful that someone with your capability, someone with your understanding, someone who takes on a challenge and meets it every time and actually moves hearts and minds. And so thank you so much for the work you're doing on behalf of all of us. I'm so proud to call you a friend, but I'm also proud to call you an American ambassador who is doing great work.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to see you and so glad to talk to you about these issues. Talk about a leader on these issues and others. It's you. You're amazing.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're people can probably tell we're a mutual admiration society. But when I talk about Cindy, I always say, she may look like a nice lady, but don't get in her way. Don't get in the way of Cindy McCain when she's got a cause. And your cause right now is feeding hungry people globally, and they could have no better ambassador than Cindy McCain.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you so much to everybody who's been watching. Pay attention to these issues. Think about what you can do within your organizations to help the World Food Program, to help the UN, and also to help American agriculture and American policymakers know that they can't retreat right now, that we've got to be engaged, and that engagement needs to be continuous and not just in response to crisis.
Right. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much.
God bless you, Cindy.
Thank you to the German Marshall Fund. Thank you.
Bye-bye.